Good afternoon. It's quite a privilege for me as a journalist to be invited to come into the academic tent and join the discussion, and I'm grateful for it. It's also been quite a privilege to read two such rich presentations. I've been taking notes when I was reading them, and also when I've been listening to Professor Chung and Professor Fong. And as I go through the notes, I'm sure we finish by about 6 in time for dinner. Even as Greg starts waving his 5-minute card. Starting with Professor Chung, it's a book proposal rather than a paper, so there are no weighty footnotes to wade through, which was nice. And it's going to be a book that I'll certainly buy, and I think it's a very important subject. Just last night, Professor Pei's talk, the first question after Professor Pei had gone through comparisons with transitions in countries all over the world, the first question was, isn't China different? There are thousands of years of history, the language, the culture, the unity. And then later on there was a question, how come when you guys are talking about feelings in your country is patriotism, but when it comes to China, it's always nationalism. So there's a spectrum between cultural pride, national pride, patriotism, chauvinism, racism, and it is a fact of history that authoritarian regimes tend to reach into the toolbox of nationalism when they feel the need for some kind of unity. We saw something like it, if you think about it, back to the Olympic torch relay. And Professor Chung makes a distinction between two kinds of sort of racist feelings, those between the Han and other nationalities in China, and those between the yellow and the white, the Han and the rest of the world, the Western world. And the two came together with this torch relay. I mean, the Chinese official lack of understanding why a bunch of runners going through Tibet and up Mount Everest would be offensive to the local population. Why can't these Tibetans understand the great glory that's happening here? And at the same time, also anger against those Western protesters that were disrupting the greatness and the glory as the torch went through Paris and other places. And finally, against Western reporting of it, with death threats being phoned into CNN and so on. So this isn't a trivial matter. It isn't just a question of cultural difference. And the one thing I thought of reading the proposal, a lot of it has very interesting source material, especially now, given that we have access to much more writing and thinking and doing with the internet and modern communications. But the source material, including the pop songs and the ads and the official propaganda and the educational materials, tell us what's being presented to people, but they don't tell us an awful lot about what Chinese people are actually thinking in this racist context. And I remember growing up in England, the BBC, the national broadcast, used to have a program called the Black and White Minstrel Show, which was a bunch of white musicians with blackface and fuzzy hair and playing banjos, and there used to be frequent comedians dressing up as Indians and using the funny Indian accents and all of this kind of thing. Unthinkable today. My point is that societies do change. Societies grow. Societies are exposed to more ideas, and there may be something like that changing in Chinese attitudes. I'm sure that the sort of attitudes you would find in doing a survey in 1970, if such a thing would be possible, would be quite different from what you find in 2013. In about 2004, I was driving along Chang'an Boulevard with my cameraman, and we saw this crowd gathered outside what used to be the silk market. And like any good resident of Beijing, you see a crowd gathering, you've got to join it, right? Plus, we want to film whatever's going on because it seemed to be a sort of hubbub. And as we sort of started getting into the crowd, the police, who were already wrestling with the crowd, started wrestling with us instead. And immediately, the people around, it's a big crowd, you know, several hundreds of people, kind of no, started shouting, 新闻自由! Press freedom, because they could see that his foreign journalists being attacked by the police. And that was interesting, but also more interesting was that right in the center of this hubbub, there was one of these market traders, an elderly woman, and she was kneeling in front of the police line, and she was holding a copy of the Constitution. This is right about the time that Professor Fang is writing about these old comrades, a guy called Li Shenzhe, who was the vice president of the Academy of Social Sciences, I think, who died in 2003. And the friends and colleagues who'd been laboring in the vineyards of progressive writing for all this time put together memorial books for him. Couldn't be published in China. They had to sort of subscribe for the printing. It's kind of a poignant little story of these older guys who had a certain amount of license and leeway in what they could say and write because of their past, because of their stature in the party, because they're anyway, clubbing together to make these little volumes and then passing them around like a samizdat publication amongst themselves. You know. The difference between then and now, you know, where a man with a laptop can press a button and reach 50 million people who are subscribing to his Weibo feed. I mean, it's amazing. So, at the time those guys were writing, there was a magazine called India, and there was a magazine called Tongzhou Gongjin, mispronounced. And those have been closed down. It's 10 years on since then. And I'm interested to hear that there is still this group of liberals and progressives and Democrats inside the Communist Party still working away since those glorious days back in 1925 or something when they started. And things have changed. I mean, Xi Jinping's accession to power, there's a lot of debate in Western circles. Is he going to be a reformer? Is this China's Gorbachev? Complete nonsense, of course, but he gave a speech in December 2011, I guess, on the, 2012, 30th anniversary of the Chinese Constitution. Gave a speech about the Constitution, and that's at the beginning of, I think, the sudden wave this year of this push on constitutional matters. He didn't say that he would like to see liberal democracy instituted in China, of course, but just the fact that he was talking about it gave a lot of people license to come out and start talking about it. But here's the vocabulary, you know, constitutionalism and the Constitution. A lot of the people, including a Shanghai academic that I know has been suspended from his job for writing, they're very, very careful in what they say, and they're talking about Article 35, which freedom of press, freedom of expression, freedom of association, all of these things. They are not talking about the preamble to the Constitution, which says, under the leadership of the Communist Party. Now, even that now, that sort of limited call for the party to obey the law that it itself passed in 1982, even that has become dangerous. Going for the full Monty of liberal democracy, multi-party elections, human rights in general, has become very much a forbidden fruit. And just in the last 2 months, you know, this debate has, a few professors have written articles and have run into trouble with their universities. In the meantime, the overseas edition of the People's Daily has had these great blasts of articles denouncing people who are trying to overthrow the party in the name of constitutionalism and so on. Incidentally, it came this week from the overseas edition to the real People's Daily. On Tuesday, there's an article from the party secretary of Shanxi province saying roughly that this constitutional thing is a cover for overthrowing the party. But my question, I guess, to Professor Fang is, are these liberals and Democrats, are they still active? Can they still speak out in the way that you're talking about in this atmosphere when even billionaire bloggers are being arrested for saying less than that, where there are the 7 things you're not allowed to talk about in internal party memos? I was wondering, I found it, the Google is a wonderful thing. You know, I found a paper written by, in June this year, Professor Fung, a statement, an online statement in favor of constitutionalism, liberal democracy and so on, with a bunch of other writers, which attracted almost 500 signatures within a month, saying, oh, this is a good thing, this constitutionalism. I'm just wondering if we know how many of those 500 are party members who dare to stick their hands up. And whether, as I say, whether this thing of discern of party members just waiting for the moment for liberal democracy to come about, whether that is still alive or whether people are just sort of going underground. And I think I'm just about ready to close here. The conclusion that you draw, I relish the optimism, as I relished Professor Pay's optimism last night. I'm on the rather more pessimistic side of the discussion about when will China become a liberal democracy. I would dearly love to be proven wrong. It's the only argument I have where I really want the other side to win. You know, the conclusion says more and more CPC members will transform themselves into Democrats who will continue to push for democratic change from within the party state until the successful establishment of liberal democracy in China. It's an amazing thing if it should happen. Wrapping up the 2 papers just a little bit, because I think there is a slight overlap which illustrates the importance of what we're talking about today and the significance of Professor Chung's book to that is, I would say, quoting that great scholar Jackie Chan, you know, there is a feeling that cultural history and Chineseness involves some kind of unique incompatibility with democracy. The Chinese people need to be controlled, that kind of thing. Professor Fung said, you know, there's this, the party is co-opting the debate. It's co-opting the dialogue, not only on liberal democracy, but also on this nationalist thing. And Chinese characteristics are right, and anything else is wrong. So I guess we're here to discuss whether there's going to be a transition, and I think that idea of, is there something in Chinese culture and history and that makes it impossible, or not? Thank you. I believe it too long.